Are you ready? Are you shitting down?
The Schein on Podcast.
The Schein on Podcast.
The Schein on Podcast, Season 5.
We're going to pull back the curtain on the divorce process. It's fun, insightful, tremendous guests. They're topics that far too often many people shy away from. But not here on the Schein on Podcast. It's episode 88 of the Schein on Podcast. I'm Evan Schein. Coming up on the featured guest spot, I sit down with acclaimed historian Stephanie Coontz. Stephanie has spent her career uncovering the real history of marriage and family life, challenging the myths, revealing the shifts, and offering powerful insights into how our most intimate relationships are shaped by the world around us. Stephanie and I talk about her book, A Marriage, A History, how love conquered marriage, and that moment. What is it like when you find out that your work was quoted in a Supreme Court decision that legalized same-sex marriage by Justice Kennedy? Producer Dave, I know we've had some absolutely brilliant, absolutely fantastic, absolutely wonderful guests on the show. This conversation and the time that we spent with Stephanie on and off the air, you know what? She's right up there at the top.
Yeah, it was special for many reasons. One, not only is she a historian, so she can fill us in some interesting facts about the history of divorce and maybe the future of divorce. And not only was she able to be quoted in a, not just a Supreme Court ruling, but a big one on gay marriage, but also I won't say how many years she has under her belt, but let's just say she's been around kind of a while and she hasn't lost anything on her fastball. Sharp woman, smart woman, a lot of fun.
No, we get into so much with her. And how about her love of blackberry pie?
Now, see, you did it again. Now I'm hungry again for blackberry pie. How can you
Right,
not?
when someone asks you your favorite pie, normally it's apple, it's cherry, it's blueberry. But I got to tell you, she has turned me on to blackberry pie. After that interview, you know what?
Blackberry pie.
Game changer. Yeah,
That's right. That's right.
let's fire up the docket.
Let's do it.
And now, let's see what's on the docket.
Well, just when you think we haven't covered all the angles, you think maybe we've already covered all the angles on divorce, there are some angles that maybe we haven't thought of, and I think both items on the docket today would indicate as such. And to start off with, here's item one, which comes to us from CNN.com.
Item 1.
The headline reads, "Signs you're in a silent divorce are loud and clear. Married couples who no longer have an emotional attachment to each other but stay together for financial or other reasons may be experiencing what they call a silent divorce." Interesting. Your thoughts on this, Evan?
Dave, look, we've talked about sleep divorce, and now we're about to talk about another type of divorce that also starts with the letter S, and you previewed it. That's the silent divorce. And if you were wondering, like me, what the silent divorce is, let me tell you what it is. Couples end up in a silent divorce when they no longer feel an attachment to each other, but continue to stay together for other reasons, finances or the kids. The signs: start doing things more separately, right? People are out there socially and at home doing things alone. A lack of physical intimacy. On the outside, they could be highly functioning and okay, and even great co-parents, but there's an emotional disconnect. And Dave, I want to get your thoughts on this. And I want to ask you, and I was thinking about this, is it fair to label this as a silent divorce? Is that word choice a bit too extreme? Or are the things that, the signs that I just mentioned, are those just bumps in the proverbial road of marriage?
And the answer lies in whatever you decide. In other words, it's not up to you or I to look at a marriage from the outside, of course, and say, yeah, look at them, silent marriage, a silent divorce, and isn't that a shame? I think everyone gets to a point in their marriage where they have to decide, are you really in it for the long haul? Is your heart really in it? Because after 10 years, after 20 years, or whatever it may be, you've been through different experiences. You might kind of be a little bit of a different person in a manner of speaking. Now, if you say to yourself, hey, we made a deal here. This is it. This is the life I signed up for. Then great. But if you say to yourself, and maybe even both parties say to themselves, this is miserable. I really wish it were otherwise, but I'm just going to sit here because I don't feel like rocking the boat. Then I think the label is fair. Now it's obviously it's a provocative headline from CNN here, silent divorce, but I do think it's a shame. When a marriage ends, it's a shame, period, because it's sad and there's a mourning no matter what. But it's also a shame to live in misery and on your deathbed have to say, I probably should have done something about that.
And Dave, I get it. And I agree with everything you're saying. But does it take away anything from a real divorce to say that people are in a silent divorce? I mean, are we just saying the silent divorce is just, I mean, would it be better called if we just say, you know what? They're in a bad marriage.
Well, right.
Like, that's my point. Like, is there something too dramatic or just not fitting for the word choice? Like, let's call it what it is. You're really referring to a bad marriage.
It's a bad marriage. So, at some point, this becomes a battle over semantics. But you're in luck, Evan, because I'm always up for semantics. Thank you very much. So, I think the suggestion here maybe is if you're in a silent divorce, you probably should be at least consider an actual divorce. That like if you're not headed that way, really that's where your heart is, and maybe you should at least have a conversation. And maybe it turns out you share some things, and you're not in a silent divorce anymore. Your marriage becomes healthier. So that's the way I take it.
Could only hope.
That's right. Let's move on to item 2.
Item 2.
This comes to us from Slate.com, and it's an advice column. The headline reads, "Oh good, my ex suddenly wants to reconnect." And yes, I read the sarcasm into that, but I'm quite sure it was meant to be that way. People say maybe we could celebrate our divorce. In other words, the letter writer says that they heard from their ex and said in so many words, hey, how about now we actually want to reconnect and be friends, and let's celebrate our divorce instead of lamenting it. And the party receiving this news wasn't too warm to receive it. So your thoughts, Evan?
Dave, let's flush this out together. What's the point of reconnecting with an ex? What are you hoping to achieve? Is it purely selfish? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, right? Is it to get something off your conscience, your guilt? Is it to correct the narrative on what was told about the end of your breakup? Is it to show your ex that you're fine, that you might even be in a better place and in a new relationship? Or is a wound best left not reopened?
That's a great question. And I'll go back to what I said to the first question, I guess, is that it all depends on how you feel about it. Some wounds, counterintuitively, you might say, some wounds are better left open and unaddressed or simply forgotten, because it doesn't always make you feel better to dredge up old things. And what the letter writer says in this case is, my ex-spouse never took responsibility for any of the terrible things they did to me leading to the divorce. And so I would say that it's not that it's the height of audacity to reach out to someone and say, hey, let's celebrate our divorce. I mean, maybe they had good intentions. Maybe they figured we're both happy now. Why can't we at least be friends? But if you make that statement, you have to be ready for the notion that your ex may still want nothing to do with you. And it sounds like this person made their bed. And so, yeah, I think not wrong to ask the question. Now, there's a whole nother thing about this is I don't know if they talk about the kids, but if you have kids to co-parent, then that's something you should be at least communicating about anyway. And to reconnect might, in the interest of the kids, I think that's a genuine thing. I think kids in at least some cases would enjoy seeing their parents be friendly and not be completely apart. But
yeah, no, look, I think that's a valid point. And Dave, obviously I've never been divorced, but I'm thinking about my prior relationships. And I got to be honest. And if any of my exes are listening, I don't need to celebrate our past relationships. I mean, if you're listening, what's there to talk about? What's there to rehash, right? People have moved on. People have lives professionally, personally. I fall into the what's the point category, and I don't really see something to gain. I think Obviously, that changes if there's kids involved and the point that you touched on.
Right.
I don't know. Would you want to sort of have that conversation to celebrate the divorce or to have that type of conversation years later?
Yeah. And I think if you drill down here, maybe the person reaching out quite possibly could be moved by guilt and might know that they made some mistakes along the way and might want to feel better about the whole thing. And like I said, if your ex-spouse says, sorry, I'm not letting you off the hook. You blew it back then, and I'm still angry. You got to accept that. You just do, because you made your bed, and it's one of the things you have to consider when you get divorced, as sad as that may seem. So, yeah, I hope they get to be friends one day, but they might not, and maybe that's okay. It was a divorce after all.
That's right.
We move on to the segment of the show known as Overrated or Underrated.
Overrated.
Or underrated.
We take several topics, we throw them out to Judge Evan Schein, and he rules one way or another, overrated or underrated. We'll take some legal ones first and then move on to some fun ones. First item, press releases about celebrity divorces. We see and we talk about them on the show sometimes. And sometimes, these people involved in divorce proactively will write press releases about the details of what's going on in their divorce. Your thoughts, overrated or underrated?
Dave, we're starting with overrated. Look, these announcements, they often feel manufactured and overly curated. They offer very little insight other than really damage control. And we now crave authenticity more than ever before. And I find that these press releases, not only do they miss the mark, the biggest problem I have with these press releases, by the time you get the information, you already know exactly what happened because of Instagram and because of X. And the way we find out information, the way we get our news, those press releases, they're a bit too late.
Overrated.
I was in the newspaper business for 15 years, Evan, and I'll tell you, we never wrote one story based on a press release. So it's the animal of the press release itself, and they do still exist, is an anachronism. Anyway, we move on. The next item, custody battles over pets. I know you've seen them. I know they are, to some, an unusual twist to a divorce case. Overrated or underrated custody battles over pets?
Dave, I've seen them and I've had them. Look, custody battles over pets, they're becoming more and more frequent. They reflect an absolutely deep emotional attachment that deserves real consideration. Pets are increasingly viewed by people as family members, and courts and the law have begun to recognize the importance of pets in people's lives. Our good friend of the Schein podcast, Judge Matthew Cooper, a dog lover himself, he decided a landmark 2013 case involving a dog. He helped establish the best interest standard in New York for pet custody cases, and in large part due to Judge Cooper and that historic case. On October 25th, 2021, New York's governor signed a bill adopting the best interest of the animal standard in property distribution of pet or companion animals. And the domestic relations law has been amended to reflect that new piece of legislation.
And for that reason, the concept or the importance of custody battles are
underrated.
Underrated.
Well, I'm with you 100%, Evan. This past week, we were talking before we started recording. I spent a few days in Florida with my girlfriend, got a nasty sunburn. Story for another day. But the important part is, before I met her down there, she was there for 3 or 4 days. Before I got there, I was at home watching the dog, my beloved Kobe, who is the most delightful little cavapoo you'll ever meet. And then when we were together in Florida, the dog was being watched by someone who he had never stayed with before, and we were worried about him 24/7. That little guy. I mean, I love him, Evan, and I hope it never comes to it, but I would fight for him, and I would hire you.
And Dave, I appreciate that. Dave, that's why you have to bring your dog on vacation with you.
I don't know if this place was dog friendly, but we'll have to seek those places out. We went to a restaurant one night on the water in Miami. Beautiful, beautiful place. But the first thing we noticed was several people had brought their dog. It was a dog-friendly restaurant, and we were so jealous.
Dave, you were living the life for 4 days. I don't want to hear you complain about your
I
salary,
know.
what I'm paying you as the executive producer of the podcast. Dave, who's living better than you?
I told you I got a nasty sunburn. Anyway, next item for overrated, underrated, legal jargon in contracts versus plain English. Now, you and I know that the lay people out there who don't have a law degree like you and I sometimes lament that we're always talking Latin and such. But this concept, legal jargon versus plain English, overrated or underrated?
Dave, I got to tell you, if you would have asked me this question when I first graduated law school or a year into the practice, I would say underrated. But once I learned all those fancy words, I have to tell you, it is absolutely overrated. Look, legal jargon is often more confusing than it is protective. Plain English often fosters a better understanding, reduces disputes, and ultimately, it's going to strengthen the enforceability of an agreement. When you're writing a motion, if you're an attorney and you're drafting something, whether it's a brief, whether it's a memo, sometimes using big, fancy legal words, you miss the mark. Say what you have to say, use the facts, use the information you have, and explain something in a very concise way. And it's true, both of agreements and legal writing. I say legal jargon in contracts is overrated.
Overrated.
I'm afraid that's a little bit reductio ad absurdum of this topic, Evan, and ipso facto subpoena deuces tacem. Maybe we should move on. I just proved your point for you. All right. We got a couple more fun ones. We'll take on a social media topic, and that is, very simply, LinkedIn. We all know it. Some of us use it. Some of us don't know how to use it. Many people probably don't. LinkedIn, overrated or underrated?
Dave, LinkedIn is underrated, and I say that despite receiving about 10 or so messages from people I've never even heard of and who are clearly spam or sending me ads or sales or whatever it might be. But look, I have to tell you, LinkedIn is still one of the most powerful tools for professional networking and branding and content production. And look, it's an opportunity really to create things, especially if you know how to use it strategically. It influences, extends far beyond job hunting. It's critical for business development. Look, it's done wonders for this podcast. How many times do we post information about the podcast, an episode release, and we share it and people listen to it? And we can thank so many loyal Schein on Podcast listeners all over the world who have messaged us and commented on how they first found the podcast. And very often it's been on platforms just like LinkedIn.
And therefore,
It's
LinkedIn
underrated.
is underrated.
Underrated.
Totally agree. People make fun of LinkedIn like, oh, it's just a bunch of people promoting themselves. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's a way for you to catch up on your professional colleagues and contacts and what they're up to. Simple as that. Why would you not want to know that? All right, then. Final item for overrated, underrated, and it's a big one. We're in the middle of basketball playoffs and baseball season. The item, Evan, is mascots at sporting events. Mascots, overrated or underrated?
Dave, we're going to end strong. And of course, this is underrated. Look, I
Oh.
went to Syracuse University for undergrad and for law school. Otto the Orange is as big and as great as it gets. He's a legendary mascot. He's the pride of Syracuse University. And look, mascots bring a sense of fun, tradition, community that often transcends the game itself. They create unforgettable memories and pictures for people of all ages, children and adults. Otto the Orange, the Philly Fanatic. How great is the Philly Fanatic? Everyone knows those goofy dances outside the dugout. Mr. Met. It pains
Met.
me as a Yankee fan to say it, but Mr. Met's got this big, giant baseball head, the classic vibe, New York attitude. Mr. Met is an absolute legend. How about the San Diego Chicken for the San Diego Padres, Major League Baseball? Dave, I got to tell you, there should be more mascots. And look, there's a reason people love going to minor league ballparks, because you have this fun, this spontaneous, this creative environment, and so much part of it. So it's a huge reason why are the mascots and the energy that it brings to the game.
Underrated.
Totally agree. I'm a little upset you didn't mention Wally the Green Monster, who patrols Fenway Park with his girlfriend Tessie sometimes. And I'll
Dave,
tell
you know how I feel about those Red Sox. Look, I give them credit when I have to, but I'm not going to go out on a limb.
I'll tell you, when Wally the Green Monster does not date back to the original days. Mr. Met probably goes back to at least to the 70s, I would say. Wally the Green Monster was introduced right around year 2000 or something, and he literally emerged from the Green Monster one day before a game with fanfare and nary a person applauding or cheering, and poor Wally was rejected until broadcasters Jerry Remy and Don Orsillo started having a little miniature Wally pop up in funny places on their set. And now I got to tell you, the kids, it's such a great thing for the kids. They adore it. And that's why in the next episode of the Schein On podcast, we'll be introducing Scheiny, the Schein On podcast mascot. We're going to see what we can do.
It's about time. Let's get it going.
Today's guest on the Schein On podcast is Stephanie Coontz, a renowned historian and leading expert on marriage, family, and gender roles. She's the author of several influential books, including Marriage, A History, How Love Conquered Marriage, which was cited in the Supreme Court's 2015 decision legalizing same-sex marriage. Her work has shaped the national conversation on relationships and social change. We are thrilled to welcome her to the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
And Stephanie, you said that marriage has changed more in the past 30 years than in the past 3,000. Is there a moment or moments that were really the tipping points?
Well, one of the things that's important to recognize is that what we think of as traditional marriage it's not traditional at all. The male breadwinner family was a totally recent invention and probably the least traditional form of marriage in all of history. It only came about in about the late 18th, early 19th century. The term male breadwinner wasn't even put into use until the 1820s or so. For most of the time, men and women were co-providers in their families. When a man said he was the sole provider, he was asking for sympathy or to be let out of something because his wife wouldn't or couldn't work with him. But for at least 3,000 years, probably more than that, that co-providing was done in a way that was extremely unfair to women. Men were in charge. That wasn't universal. I don't agree with those people who think that marriage is an institution is inherently oppressive to women, because there were thousands of years before that where it was not. But having said that in my long-winded way, something really, really changed in the last 30 or 40 years. And that is that we began to envision, to want, and also to be able to organize marriage on a basis free from coercion. Coercion by parents who used to organize it, by the state, by our own biology, our reproductive, and by men's authority over women and children. It is an unheard of aspiration and possibility, but it runs us up against all of the institutions and so many of the, what I call in my latest book that I just turned into the editor, the earworms that we have from the past. We're saying, let's have marriages that are completely free from coercion, that are mutually agreed upon. And that is a real challenge and I think that we can do it, but it's going to take a while.
And Stephanie, you mentioned your latest book. Tell us what inspired you to write another book. What's it about? Give us a little preview into that process for you.
Well, to be honest, it started right before I realized that I was going to be a grandmother. And I was looking for things to do in my...
Congratulations.
Let's write a new book. And then I realized, oh gosh, I've got a COVID surprise grandbaby come too. But the reason that I wanted to do it was because I wanted just to use my history in a different way than I had before, to say, let's look at the kind of earworms, the kinds of habits, the kinds of misbeliefs about the past that stand in the way right now of our getting to this freely organized marriages that I just talked about a minute ago. And so, unlike other books where I tried to be more historic, to proceed through a particular chronology, I go to just a couple times of the past that we either misunderstand, for example, why marriage was invented in the first place, or that we inherited these ideas that still stand in the way of how we should organize marriage today if we want it to be that kind of mutually satisfactory relationship that we want.
And Stephanie, if you would design a marriage from scratch today, what would it look like? What would you keep? And what would you ditch?
Well, one of the things I would get rid of, and there is a long list, is first of all, the idea that marriage is absolutely essential for people's lives, and that should be the main thing that we aim for and the main place we get all of our needs and emotional satisfactions from. Because one of the big things we know from research is that marriage is one of the things we've inherited from the 1950s idea of marriage is that it should be an exclusive one-on-one thing, and that you should not let other people or family members or friends interfere with this incredibly intense relationship. It turns out, though, that research shows exactly the opposite, that the more you have friends and networks and social supports outside the family, as long as they aren't opposed to your partner, sometimes that does happen, the better your relationship is with your partner. For example, when they look at what the studies that make women the happiest in marriage, it's not the time alone they spend on this stupid idea of the date night. Date night's great for dates when you're dating. After you've been married for a while, it's kind of like, oh gosh, really? We're going to go out and try to pretend that there's something new we can talk about? Try double date night, or it's socializing with friends makes the people happier than just socializing with their significant other. So that's one thing. We should get rid of that. We also should get rid of the idea that marriage is the main institution in which we will make all the major decisions. That's no longer true. People say that marriage is dying. That's not true. But it's completely changed in terms of when we enter it and how much of our lives it organizes. Back in the 1950s, 87% of women and men were married, had been married at least, by the time they reached their mid-30s. Today, it takes till our mid-50s for that many to have experienced marriage. But that many do eventually experience it. So it's not something that we can just write off. But we have to understand that we come to it in a totally different way. Most of the time, we've already reached adulthood. We've already have two separate, for example, careers or residences, and we have to be able to mesh those in a way we never had to have to do before. There's just dozens of what I call in the book rules of engagement that basically have to be changed. It used to be, if you were a woman, if you didn't marry back in the 1950s, by the time you were 25 or so, you either never got married or you had a higher chance of divorce. Today, every year you delay marriage up until your 30s, the lower your chance of divorce. It used to be that a woman who was highly educated was less likely to marry and more likely to divorce than a woman who wasn't. Now the opposite is true. So I could just go on, but why don't I let you say some things that interest you?
Okay, give us a moment in history that you wish every modern couple would know about.
Wow, what an interesting question, and a difficult one. I think there are several. One, for example, would be looking at the way our Paleolithic ancestors lived, because we have been handed so many misconceptions about that, about what makes for the ideals of beauty, what makes for attraction, and the idea that men were looking for women who were younger than they were and more compatible. I mean, not compatible so much as docile. and fertile, and supposedly our ideals of beauty have to do with fertility, when in fact, if you look back at hunting and gathering societies, they have very different ideals of beauty. They're more interested in sturdy female figures. And then the idea that women are always looking for men who have more money than they and who are older than they. All these things were not true of the past because people were looking for good partners, people who could work together and were compatible, but also had connections outside the home. And it turns out there's interesting new studies that Finkel and other people are doing that show that when you actually ask people what they want, the women will say an older man with a more career, and the men say a younger woman, and all. But then when they actually put them in a quick dating situation, turns out that all the things that they're saying are the stereotypes they've inherited from the past, and that's not what predicts either their attraction or certainly not their long-term compatibility. So that's one thing I would say. There are probably many more, but you can ask me which ones you want.
What will historians of the future say about this era of marriage and relationships?
Well, historians hate to be asked questions about the future because, and especially historians like me, because it really depends on what we do now. And if we let things go the way we have now, in terms of continuing to refuse to give social support systems to families, historians are going to look back and say, my gosh, look at how this society collapsed. It's part of the collapse of that we're going to be looking at. On the other hand, if we stopped insisting that everybody do things the same way and understood that children need, whether born in or out of marriage, need support, and that relationships need support from outside, and that family life has got to be organized so that it doesn't just rob us of our ability to negotiate. The fact that we're doing marriage more fairly now means we need a lot more negotiation and time to make it work than we used to. So if we find those things and do those things, then historians will look back and say this was a turning point for the better. And if we don't, they're going to say this was a turning point for the worse.
Stephanie, you were cited in a Supreme Court decision. Tell us about the case and what was that moment like for you?
Well, it was interesting. First of all, I didn't know it was going to be. I was out bodyboarding in Hawaii, and I came back from the waves and found that my email and my voicemail was completely full. And people were all excited. So I was excited and I looked it up. And then I read the opinion and I had to laugh because I was very happy that the opinion was there. But so much of it was based upon misconceptions about the past on both sides. I mean, the opposition said wrongly that marriage had always been between one man and one woman. Well, hello, the first 5 books of the Bible, one man and many women. And there have been also many, many other variations of marriage in the past. But then Justice Kennedy, who wrote the decision, also had these ideas that marriage had always been an ennobling kind of institution, which it was not. Marriage used to be, for thousands of years, marriage was about man's control over his wife and his children. And men had rights to divorce that women didn't. And child abuse and wife abuse were hardly ever cause for stepping in and helping a couple or an individual out. So there were all of these delusions about marriage historically having played this great role, and those play into the notion that we should not rethink what traditional marriage is. But of course, I was happy to see that they were prepared to allow same-sex couples access to the institution of marriage.
Have you ever been surprised by your own research, something that you didn't want to believe, but you had to accept?
Yes, well, I think twice in my life, although it was earlier, I started out like most women my age, thinking that marriage was the thing. I can remember in early high school writing my first name in conjunction with the last name of a boy that I was interested in. And then I went away to college and I started learning all about how women had been oppressed. And so then I thought I would never want to get married and that it had always been oppressive and you ought to destroy the institution once and for all. And then, of course, I began to study more anthropology and realized that this wasn't always the case. And when I finally got married, it was like, it took me months to say the word husband without stuttering, my husband. But then nowadays it just jumps seamlessly off my off my tongue. So I'm continually learning new things about marriage and about relationships. That's what's fun about being a historian, I guess, and just living in this age, although some of what we're learning in this age isn't all that fun.
What advice would you give to your 25-year-old self about relationships and marriage?
I guess the kind of advice that I would give to myself would be to make sure that I am happy and satisfied as a single person before I get married, not to expect that marriage will solve that for me. And then to seek someone who is supportive of my happiness and whose happiness I want to support. So instead of all the things that we're told that we should be looking for with the romantic kind of stuff. And then to younger women of this period, I would give the same advice. And to the men, I would say, we all have these habits. Women as well as men have these habits that were ingrained on us for the past 200 years of this notion that men should earn the money and women should take care of the home. And these have turned into real risk factors for divorce nowadays, very, very quickly. 20, 30 years ago, if a woman earned more money or had more education than her husband, that was a risk factor that they would divorce. Now that's gone. And in fact, research of marriages that were formed in the 80s showed that if a man did too much so-called women's work around the house, wearing an apron and stuff like that, that was supposed to be terrible for a marriage. And in fact, women felt less attracted to men who did that, and those marriages weren't happier. That has completely reversed. It's now when the man doesn't pick up an apron and do that kind of work that you have risk in a marriage.
So with all that said, there's so much conversation about the future of marriage. So let me ask you, what is the future of marriage? Do you see it evolving into something totally different from what it is now?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think marriage is on the way out. As I said earlier, most people do get married. Most people do still want to get married. Women are, contrary to stereotype, a little more cautious about it and suspicious of it than men. But and there's ambivalence about it. But on the whole, most people say that they would like to end up with someone who is the equivalent of a marriage, whether they actually have the certificate or not. So I think that the question is, how can we reorganize our emotional expectations and assumptions about gender? And how can we reorganize also our social expectations? Because for a lot of years, we've tried to pretend that marriage will solve all of the problems. We spent millions and millions of dollars promoting marriage, all to no effect. And if we had succeeded, it would not have wiped out poverty. What would have happened is you would have had a lot more divorces because of the stresses of poverty and insecurity. So we have to understand that marriage is only one of the kinds of living relationships that people will go through in the course of their life. And we need to support people's ability to sustain an individual life and a family life, as well as a work life that doesn't just suck it all out of them, but provides enough social support, either through the government or through the wages, that people have time to cultivate a personal life and social life. And that doesn't just for married couples and couples with children. Single individuals spend more time helping relatives and friends than married couples do, aside from their own kids. And so they're a very important part of our social network. And so we shouldn't, it's very important for us to understand that we just have to help people build more balanced lives than we're allowing them to build right now.
No, that's brilliant. So let me ask you, do any societies get it right when it comes to that work-life balance?
Well, I think that some of the Nordic societies do a lot better job than we do. But one of the things that's clear is that we've never before in history asked this much of equality between men and women, and at the same time face such tremendous challenges in terms of climate change and all of the kind of issues we're seeing now with these so-called populists. They're not at all populist, authoritarian regimes popping up. This is a tremendously challenging period. We can't expect people to just suddenly say, I have this ideal and it's going to be perfect for me. We need to work at it. It's going to be hard.
We hear so much about divorce being less taboo now than in the past. Do you think the rising acceptance of divorce is a sign of social progress or relational failure?
Well, I think that it's important that we recognize that not all marriages will last, and that if we accept the idea that it's all right to leave a marriage that is not working, I think we will actually improve the outcome of divorce for individuals and children. One of the things that causes problems for kids and for individuals is not so much having had a divorce as what kind of a divorce you've had. And to the extent that we tell people divorce is wrong, it's shameful, it's bad, then that forces them to either blame themselves or more likely to blame their partner and to engage in the kind of conflict that we know for sure is the very best predictor that a child is going to have a bad outcome from divorce. And we're learning now that many of the problems that sociologists for years that children of divorce have, blamed on the divorce, turned out when they looked more carefully, those problems were evident in the children 8 to 10 years before the divorce happened. They were problems with a bad marriage, not with the divorce. Now, a divorce can either make things better or it can make things worse. And of course, the kind of high conflict divorces that we encourage tend to make things worse. But there's a wonderful statistic. Paul Amato and some other people actually looked at the impact of divorce on kids. And they found that in most cases, if there were changes, the changes were somewhat negative. Like bullying increased for 18% of the kids of divorce that they studied, but it decreased for 14%. And they went through for reading scores, for self-achievement, all of those kinds of things. The majority of kids showed no change, and a significant minority showed improvements. So when you look at the minority that did show real problems, you have to ask, what could we have done differently about the divorce or about the marriage to avoid those problems? And I think that's what I think lawyers like you need to help their clients learn to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stephanie, is there a historical precedent for an amicable divorce, or is divorce throughout history always been messy?
Oh, there's plenty of, first of all, when we look at hunting and gathering societies, their divorce is very easy there, and it doesn't seem to involve any kinds of retribution or just okay, we're not getting along, we part. In fact, among certain groups like the Inuit, a divorced when she remarries, they're all considered to be part of an extended family, to have some obligations to each other. In ancient Rome, you could divorce by saying, I repudiate you. If you did it in the heat of anger, though, the divorce wasn't valid. But if you said it 3 times and had a witness say, yes, they're doing it. And we have cases there where men who had been divorced and remarried the same woman, when she died, they co-built some memorial for her. So it's not impossible to have at all.
You have accomplished so much in your career, in your life? What do you want your legacy to be?
Oh, well, that always seems so kind of self-absorbed to talk about that. I would hope that some of my books continue to be read. And on a personal level, I hope that my son will tell good stories to my lovely new grandson about the fact that I made the best blackberry pies in the world.
Well, cool. Stephanie, I want to give you my address. I love a good blackberry pie. It's like being a grandmother.
It's a lot of fun. It can be some work. I'm not the kind of woman who would make a good full-time grandmother, but I love the joy of grandparenting is you get the love and you can turn the child over when the child gets sick and hungry. But right now we're at the stage where he says to me, "You know why I want to play with you, Grandma? Because I love you." I mean, God, what gets better than that?
What's better? I want to bring the producer Dave onto the show for a fun segment we do on the podcast called They Said It.
Let's get right into it, Evan.
They said it.
They said it.
They said it.
All right. Time again for They Said It, where I produce 3 quotes from famous people, and we'll see how Stephanie responds to them. I almost quoted the Supreme Court decision where Stephanie's own work was quoted, but something seemed redundant about that. Nevertheless, we celebrate that moment. The first one, in fact, comes from playwright George Bernard Shaw, who had the following to say, and this is a long quote, so I better get ready here. Okay. He had the following to say: when 2 people are under the influence of the most violent, most insane, most delusive, and most transient of passions, they are required to swear that they will remain in that excited, abnormal, and exhausting condition continuously until death do them part. Tell us, pro, con, or otherwise, Stephanie, what do you think of George Bernard Shaw's words?
Oh, I think it's very perceptive that this is the idea that you fall in love and then you get married on as fast as you've fallen in love, and you vow that will be that way. This is interesting because of cohabitation. It used to be that couples who moved in together before they married had a higher divorce risk, but that's disappeared now. And the majority of marriages begin with cohabitation. So I think we're moving past this delusion that Shaw was talking about, and people are really getting to know each other before they make that step.
It is true. So many people, well, at least in my generation, Evan's a younger man than I, but we're not too far off. But anyway, our generation, I think it was still de rigueur to get married in your 20s because that's what you do. And then you have a kid in your late 20s or early 30s, and then you have another kid, and on you go. And then one day, some people wake up and realize, why did I do that when I was 23 years old? Anyway, great thought, Stephanie. We move on to quote number 2. It comes to us from pioneering Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm. She said the following: "We are not what we used to be. We are not yet what we are going to be." So at the risk of having you repeat yourself on this, Stephanie, it now occurs to me. Tell me what you think of Shirley Chisholm's words.
Well, it's exactly what Evan and I were talking about. I'll give you a good example from my new book, and that is that many of the things that really, really threaten marriages today have to do with the division of labor at home. Women are really dissatisfied with men's failure to step up. But we women have our own things that we don't even realize. Like, we are for equality and we need to insist that we get fairness at home. But at the same time, we women do a lot of things like gatekeeping. Now, gatekeeping is when you say, I'd like you to be my helper, but I want you to do it on my terms. I'll let you into the gate if you do it my way. Now, I've lectured about this for years, and yet just a couple years ago, my husband caught me reorganizing the dishwasher after he'd loaded it. And he hasn't put his lunch dishes away in the dishwasher since because it was so disrespectful. So these are the little habits.
And Dave, I share it with you. I do the same thing. I load the dishes, my wife reorganizes them. I stop hearing the dishes.
Right. Well, That's the thing. I mean, so this is what Shirley was talking about. We have developed new ideals, but we haven't yet internalized and routinized the way to live up to those ideals. And so I give people a little credit on that, but it's not like you forgive it and you say, oh, well, okay, we shouldn't change. It's just that you're compassionate about why people do some of these things. And that makes it easier, I think, to ask for change. It doesn't let people off the hook for not changing.
Well, see, I have the problem solved. I'm no longer married. I live by myself, and I don't do my dishes. They're just sitting there. So maybe
Well, that's a solution.
maybe so. As inartful as it may be, it's a very temporary solution, I might point out. We move on to the third and final quote from They Said It. It comes from former government official John W. Gardner, who said the following: "History never looks like history when you are living through it." History never looks like history when you are living through it. Sounds like a little bit of pretzel logic, but I actually like this quote. I'm curious as to what you have to say, Stephanie.
Well, I mean, I agree. It's for historians, that's not entirely true. Like a historian right now, I'm inclined to draw parallels with the tremendous cultural warfare that there was in the 1920s after World War I, which is all about sexual and gender, some deportation. So I can say to myself, okay, we had this once before. What's different about it now? How can we end it? It did come to an end before. What can we do about it? So, but I think that it is easier for a historian to do that. And in fact, I'll tell you my own personal theory that sometimes taking a historical perspective on problems, either personal or social, is even more helpful than going to therapy, because it allows you to step back from it and say, okay, this isn't my personal problem or my partner's personal problem. This is something that is a bigger social problem that maybe we should figure out how to fight together.
Excellent thoughts. Excellent thoughts. And I might add, on a personal note, I took particular interest in your being cited in the U.S. Supreme Court's decision on same-sex marriage. I was working for a newspaper called Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly in 2004 when the Goodridge decision came out of the Massachusetts Supreme Court. I knew all of the justices. I wouldn't say we were friends, but I knew them because I was a publisher of the legal newspaper, and I was there when that 4-3 decision came down and the wheels went around then. And I was quoted on TV a fair amount just as a legal analyst, and it was very exciting. And I'm not sure I knew that it was history in the moment. I probably would have dressed nicer or tried to sound more profound, but exciting times we live in, and the definition of the family isn't over. I think we can all agree to that. There'll always be changes. Anyway, I'm not the expert. You are, Stephanie, and thank you so much. You passed They Said It with flying colors as far as I'm. And back to you, Evan, to wrap things up.
Dave, that was great. Thank you as always. And Stephanie, I got to tell you, I feel like we could talk for hours and hours over some Blackberry pie. This was great. Absolutely fantastic. Your books, your work, your career, everything you have done, everything you have accomplished. We can't wait to see what's next. And you mentioned you have a book coming out. We wish you the absolute best. And I want to thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, it really was my pleasure. This was about the funnest podcast I've done in years.
Episode 88, it's in the books. Great show, tremendous guest, in outstanding. Overrated, underrated segment. Dave, you were on fire.
Well, we talked a little bit about baseball, about silent divorces, and about dogs. And Evan, what a show.
What a show. What a show. Absolutely brilliant. Look, you can listen to the podcast in this episode and all episodes of the Schein podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe. Send in your comments and emails to producer Dave. I'm Evan Schein, and I'll talk to you again real soon.